Today, we are fortunate to hear Dr. Andy Thomson, who received his MD degree from the University of Virginia School of Medicine in 1973. In 1978, he became a diplomate of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and he maintained a private adult psychiatric practice for 41 years and remains a staff psychiatrist at Counseling and Psychological Services at the University of Virginia Student Health Services, seeing young adult patients. He's also on the clinical faculty at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. Dr. Thomson's current research interest is in the area of evolutionary psychology and using its principles to understand depression, terrorism by suicide, and regarding today's topic, the religious belief. So I proudly present Dr. Andy Thomson.
Andy, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. On the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles, all mankind, from the beginning of the world until the present day, have been quarreling, fighting, burning, and torturing one another over abstractions, unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. All right. Let me give you that again because I think it is important. On the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles, all mankind, from the beginning of the world to the present day, have been quarreling, fighting, and burning one another over abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words in 1816. And the essence of my talk today is this. If you were to run into Mr. Jefferson next week, you could say to him, "No, Mr. President, religion is no longer beyond the comprehension of the human mind. In point of fact, Mr. President, we are on the verge of a comprehensive psychology of religious belief, a comprehensive cognitive neuroscience of religion. And we are in that position because when you wrote those words in 1816, there was a 7-year-old boy in England who would grow up to give us the only workable explanation we had for the design and variety of all life on Earth. But most importantly to this topic, would give us the only workable explanation we have for the design and architecture of the human mind. Darwin knew that when he wrote his great book, Origin of Species. And this is in the next to the last paragraph. Psychology will be based on a new foundation. And it took us over 150 years to start to see the wisdom of Darwin and to apply it to psychology. And it has created the cognitive neurosciences that allow us to understand religion. So what is my goal today? My goal, several goals actually. First and foremost is to give you a set of tools that you can use in your discussions with believers and to show them the mechanisms by which they are vulnerable to religious belief, the mechanisms they use to generate religious belief, why we spread them, why they're sticky, and why we are vulnerable to have them. And oops, sorry. And let me give you a roadmap. Before I do that, a couple of things. I want to thank all of you for coming here today. I want to thank Don and Fred for the invitation to be here. I want to especially thank them for the rehearsal we had 2 weeks ago. Thank you. Let me give you a little bit of a roadmap so you'll know where we're going and where we are. We're going to start off with the modern Darwinian synthesis, just a bit of that, then a brief thing on human evolution. then we're going to talk about the basis of religion, that it's a byproduct of cognitive mechanisms that evolved in other circumstances for other purposes. Then I want to show you how, if you understand the psychology of junk food and the psychology of pornography, you will understand the psychology of religion. Then I'm going to show you some of the mechanisms, not all, but some of the mechanisms that are crucial to why we generate religious belief. The attachment mechanism, hypersensitive agency detection, cognitive decoupling, the things that make us vulnerable to believe in souls and life after death. And then we will finish up by talking about rituals that supercharge those beliefs, hijacking crucial neurotransmitters in our brain, which evolved originally for other purposes. So let's start with the modern Darwinian synthesis. This is how most people view natural selection, that it operates at the level of the individual. We're close, but not quite. Darwinian natural selection, I think probably as most of this audience knows, operates not at the level of the individual, but at the level of the gene, at the level of DNA. All right, life slim volume, spirally bound. Spiral, the double helix of DNA. And if you step back from it for a moment, of course, that makes sense. What's the fundamental unit of life? The gene, DNA. So that's where natural selection is going to operate. And I think this is a crucial synthesis of the modern Darwinian synthesis. Every organism is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time, to promote in some specific way the survival of the genes that directed their construction. So my lungs solve the problem of extracting air. Hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting it. My heart solves the problem of pumping it. At every level of biological inquiry, Darwinian natural selection. But the other thing that's important about this summary is that this is a statement about the human mind. The mind is what the brain does, and the mind-brain is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, the adaptations we use in religion, shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote in some specific way the survival of the genes that built those adaptations. I don't know if you can see this. This says, well, my psychiatrist says, if it makes you happy, do it. One of the crucial pieces of the modern Darwinian synthesis is that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are designed by our genes for the benefit of our genes, not necessarily for our own self-interest. Right? And that's crucial. Most of the time, self-interest and genetic interest are in sync, but there are times when it is not. Suicide is obviously one of the most extreme, but there are, I think, powerful supported theories that suicide is an adaptation to promote the survival of genes in our kin. So this is Steve Pinker's analogy. The mind brain is like the Apollo spacecraft. What's the Apollo spacecraft? It's this complex array of engineering devices solving a constant stream of problems, only some of which become conscious to the astronauts. And that's what we're talking about. The human mind is a myriad of adaptations, most of which don't reach conscious awareness. I'm an upside down two-dimensional image on your retina. Innumerable adaptations turn it into the three-dimensional view that you have, but you're not conscious of any of those select visual adaptations unless perhaps you've got a little color blindness. And it's these adaptations that I'll show you, which evolved in other circumstances for other purposes, which are hijacked and used for the powerful cultural construct, which is religion. So, modern Darwinian synthesis. All right. We are risen apes, not fallen angels. Let's look at human evolution, because these adaptations that I'm going to be talking about evolved in an environment, long before history, right? And Darwin knew this, and he said the only appearance of human beings in the origin of species is this line: light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. And Darwin probably already knew that we evolved from apes. He didn't publish it until 1870. Here's a way you can think about it, because our minds can't deal with these time sequences. Let's just take today, all right? The 24 hours of today, we'll turn it into every hour is 100,000 years. So 2.4 million years ago is midnight last night, right? And up to tonight at midnight. 24 hours, 2.4 million years, right? And I think I blew it. I think it's 1 hour is 100,000 years, if I didn't say that. All right, so 2.4 million years in the 24-hour period. So our genus, I mean, we're not talking about Lucy here. We're just talking about our genus Homo shows up 2.4 million years ago. We start to leave Africa about breakfast time. Some of us reach Europe. Homo ancestor, I think, may reach Europe about lunchtime. It is not until 6 o'clock tonight that Homo heidelbergensis shows up in Africa. Some of them go to Europe and become Neanderthal, and we become Homo sapiens shows up somewhere between 9 and 10 o'clock tonight. And it is not until 10 minutes before midnight that we start to settle down into agricultural communities. Maybe to brew better beer, but that's another story. So most of our evolutionary history is as kin-based hunter-gatherers. That's the environment that drove the evolution of the adaptations we're going to be talking about. So the evolutionary past is what frames our experienced present, that life was an endless camping trip with close relatives. Now, this on the left is a skull of Homo erectus. On the right is one of our skulls. I draw your attention to the frontal lobe areas. You can see that one of the things that distinguishes us is this huge frontal lobe area. Why? Now, 2 million years ago, Homo erectus had made it out of Africa and got as far away as probably Indonesia, China. So we'd conquered the physical environment maybe almost 2 million years ago. What were the selective pressures that drove the evolution of Homo sapiens and part of why we're the last surviving hominid? And it's not the physical environment, it's the human environment, right? And that it is the human environment dealing with other people that drove the evolution of our frontal lobes, our social brain. We are an exquisitely social species, and it is those social psychological adaptations that go into religion. And some of you certainly familiar with this. Modern Homo sapiens, or at least anatomically modern Homo sapiens, show up in Africa, and it's probably closer to 300,000 years. And we leave Africa probably 100,000 years ago. We conquer the world. We're the last surviving hominid. And one of the things that may be crucial to our success is that we achieved what the insects achieved, which is eusociality. And what characterizes eusociality? Multi-generational care of the young, cooperative care of the young. Chimpanzee mother is not going to let her sister hold her baby. Division of labor, defense of a local commune, and self-sacrifice, the most extreme, of course, being suicide. But I hope, as you can already maybe start to see, religions will hijack and utilize these characteristics that allowed us to survive eusociality. And again, keep in mind that our evolutionary history is basically an endless camping trip with close relatives. That's the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. That's the environment that generates these social adaptations which go into religion. And so all religious ideas, religious beliefs come down to they're a byproduct of these cognitive mechanisms that were designed for other purposes. And they are really an artifact of our ability for imagined social worlds. I can think about what you all might be thinking about this presentation. All of you, while you're sitting here, can think about what some people you have to deal with tomorrow or this week might be thinking, right? We have this exquisite social brain. And all religious ideas are human concepts with slight alterations. Now, a lot of people say, well, I mean, byproduct doesn't sound very powerful. Think about reading and writing. Reading and writing is a cultural byproduct. We don't have reading and writing adaptations. We've got vision, fine motor skills, and we have innate language as an adaptation. Language, vision, fine motor skills come together to give us reading and writing. And I don't think anyone would say that reading and writing and cultural literacy is a modest cultural creation. Now, I said earlier that if you understand the psychology of junk food and pornography, you understand religion. All of us here today have cravings for sweets, but the original sweets were ripe fruit, not the highly selected sugar-loaded fruit that we get in our grocery store. We have cravings for ripe fruit. It was a source of sugar. We have a craving for fat, but it's originally a craving for lean game meat. And so what junk food does is junk food is a cultural creation that comes from our adaptations, but then comes back at us in super normal stimuli. I don't know about you all, but if there's a brownie and a peach downstairs and I wake up at 3 a.m., I'm going to eat the brownie, a super normal stimulus that comes from one of my adaptations. And as you'll see, religion is the same thing. Religion comes at us with powerful parental figures, more powerful than our ordinary parents and our attachment system. Somebody sent this to me. I just absolutely love it. So when you think of religion and the psychology of religion, think the psychology of junk food. It's the same for pornography. Men, and pornography is male-based primarily. Men are attracted to certain things. They're maximally attracted to markers of youth, fertility, what's called null parity, no children, but youth, fertility, null parity. There are other markers that men are attracted to. And pornography, flips those around and it comes back at us in super normal stimuli. I want to turn to the attachment system, because this is, I think you want to think of it as sort of the double helix of religion. This is obviously a fundamentalist service. What does a two-year-old do when they want your attention or are hurting? They sort of waddle over to you and they put their hands up and you instinctively pick them up. That's the attachment system. And this was, in humans, was described by psychologist Mary Ainsworth here in the United States and British psychiatrist John Bowlby. If you're interested in this, I would go to the Atlantic Monthly, 1990, Robert Caron's article on being attached. They were still alive. He interviewed him. It's a wonderful introduction. There's another book that just came out, Bethany Saltman's The Strange Situation. These are two excellent resources for digging deeply in beautifully written material about the attachment system. Now, the attachment system is as old as vertebrates, probably older. And here's why it's so important, and I think is the fundamental unit of religious belief. We come into this world with an inborn model that mothers exist, mothers know how to help, mothers are able to and want to and will help, particularly when they hear crying. And this animal comes into the world with that model, and other vertebrate of our ancestors did as well. And of course, we carry it. So how does this show up in religious belief? Mothers exist. We have a certainty of faith. Mothers know how to help, the omniscient caretaker. Mothers are able to, want to, and will help, omnipotent, the omnipotent gods that we worship. And when she hears us crying, right? So gods will answer our prayer. If you're ever around an infant, put your finger just in their palm, right? And what will they do? The Moro reflex, they'll grab you. That's an ancient a part of our attachment system. Mothers nourish. Mothers have a face and a melodic voice. We come into the world already with those systems in our brain. and that these circuits persist into adulthood. And they form the basis of all relationships, our friendships, our romantic relationships, our partnerships. This is the attachment system. And these circuits can create the illusion of a loving presence in helpless circumstance. I cannot recommend to you strongly enough John Wathay's book from 2016, The Illusion of God's Presence. He lays it out. He's a neuroscientist, and he lays it out more thoroughly and better than anybody. He has a new book, which deals into the neuroscience more of it all. But I would start with his book, The Illusion of God's Presence. It's just fantastic. Think about when you rock an infant, right? And that's the attachment system, the caretaking response, the stimulation of our vestibular system. Think about the men at the Wailing Wall, right? John Wathay's book is The Phantom God. The second book is The Phantom God. I forgot to mention that. So think about your men at the Wailing Wall, the movement, the davening, okay? That's stimulating the vestibular system, that's stimulating the attachment system. Think of all the movement in religious rituals, which we'll come more to in a minute. Think about communion. And I wish I tried to find it, but I was hoping to find a picture from the coronation yesterday of the king and queen getting communion. What is communion? It evokes that helpless child being fed by a parent. What about music? And I forgot to mention, one of the things I'm going to do to give you in the roadmap here is we're going to also utilize that intensely religious service yesterday, which was the coronation of Charles. And I want you to look particularly at the choir members here, right? And who are the choirs? They're children. Children evoke attachment. Now, just stop and think about hymns that you know. I know mostly Christian hymns, and I would submit to you that they all are going to, almost all of them, are going to evoke the attachment system. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was blind, but now I see. I was lost, but now I'm found. The old African-American gospel song, you know, swing low, sweet chariot, coming forward to carry me home. Yesterday at the coronation, they sang the Queen's favorite hymn, which was Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven. And one of its verses, again, there are many that evoke the attachment system, but one of the verses was, Father like he tends his grace and, Father like he tends and spares us. Well, our feeble frame he knows. In his hand he gently bears us. Rescues us from all our foes. And just think of if you brought up in the Christian church and you know Christian hymns, think of those Christian hymns. I would submit to you, they will almost all evoke the attachment system. What about scripture? This is just one example. But if you look certainly at Christian scripture, much of it, once you get the slaughter and mayhem and some of the other things aside, but look at a lot of the scripture. It again evokes the attachment system. When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord, a parent, will take me up. All right, so the attachment system, I would argue, is one of the fundamentals. Now, why are we vulnerable to the belief of life after death, of souls? This is a human burial in Israel, 90,000 years old. It's an adolescent male. And I hope you can see that they placed the horns of an antelope with the young man. So there's clearly an idea of this young man going into the afterlife. And if you know Egyptian civilization, which is 3,000 years old, it's full of afterlife stuff. But here we have evidence of afterlife belief in our species around the time that we became modern Homo sapiens. Where does this come from? This is a fancy name, decoupled cognition, but it's actually quite simple. Right now, you can decouple your cognition from time and place. While you're listening to me, you can think of something that happened last week, different place, different time. Most of us, it's more future. You can think of who you can still be listening to me and taking in what I'm saying. And you can think about somebody you have to deal with at work next week. So we can decouple cognition in time and place, but more fundamentally, we can decouple our cognition, mind, and body. And I'm going to use this apple here for a minute to demonstrate this. Imagine that this is your brain, right? So if we have half of your brain right here, okay, this is the medial, the internal part, medial right here, and this is the external, right, the outer cortex. Medial in here, and this is where we perceive our own thoughts and feelings. And when I think about what Don may be thinking about right now, I'm processing it medially. So my mind, other people's mind, I'm thinking about it, processing it medially. When I am looking at Don's left shoulder, I'm processing that with my right external cortex, right? So if I'm thinking about my right hand, that's being processed left external cortex. So there is a split between mind and body that's built into our neural hardware. So this is dualism. The brain represents mind and bodies in separate neural circuits. And so we're born with experiencing and believing minds and bodies are discrete, separate categories. Despite, we know the evidence is that the mind is what the brain does, but we experience it as separate. And this is a very useful adaptation. If I had to have Don standing in front of me to think about what he was thinking about, that would be really hard. So if that belief in the form of life apart from what is experienced in the body, that's actually the default setting of the human mind. That allows all of us right now, if we want to, imagine that we could ask Barack Obama to run again for president. You all can instantly think about that, right? That's a decoupled in time and place, and we are interacting with a mind that is elsewhere. This is what the basis of ancestor worship is. I don't know about you, but I find myself still talking to people that were near and dear to me who have long gone. And that my mind processing what's going on in their mind is separate from an awareness of what happened to their body. And this sets up the ability to imagine souls. This is why you can have a soul, a mind elsewhere. And you start to see that, say, with the attachment system and reciprocity, we can communicate with ancestors. We have hyperactive agency detection mechanisms. We see faces in the cloud. We see man in the moon. Right now, wherever you're sitting in your house, if you heard a door slam, you would jolt and you would automatically assume it was human agency until proven otherwise. Hyperactive agency detection mechanisms. Now, I'm going to talk about something called minimally counterintuitive worlds. And this is crucial to religions. If I told you that this tree could fix your computer, do your taxes, wash your car, you're just simply not going to believe me because there are too many violations of treeness, right? There's just too much that's not tree in there. However, if I told you that this tree on the night of a full moon could hear your wishes, you would be a little bit vulnerable to believing that. Now, maybe not this audience, but all of us would be a little bit vulnerable to believing that because there's only a slight violation of treeness. And that violation includes a human concept, and a human concept that has to do with the human mind. And these are minimally counterintuitive worlds. They're crucial to religion. And there's sort of an optimum of a compromise between the interesting and the expected. They're attention arresting and memorable. So they more easily get passed on to other people because they're attention arresting and memorable. One of the most powerful, of course, is the Virgin Mary. Think about it. There's no violations about what you know about young women, young girls, young mothers with an infant son. There are basically no violations except one little one, which Christopher Hitchens, I think, used to refer to as she's a young woman, with the one exception that she didn't have to go through the usual prerequisites to have a son. And think of how powerful the Virgin Mary has been in religion and obviously the Catholic Church. And this is what goes into a lot of religious figures. And what they do is, again, it's like pornography, like junk food. It hijacks crucial adaptations we have. We have evolved expectations of the world. I know what trees are, what horses are, we have evolved expectations of the world, but we have, for our fitness, for our survival and reproductive success, we have to have the ability to quickly identify anomalies, novelties, right? Some of them, of course, we'll instantly think are agents, but we have to have that ability to quickly identify anomalies in the expected world. And this is what religion hijacks with these minimally counterintuitive worlds. How is it forged into religion? Because you could say, well, Mickey Mouse is kind of a minimally cognitive, intuitive world. They're forged into religion because they are intentional agents, human agents. They usually possess strategic information about us, right? They know if you've been naughty or nice. They interact with the world. They can intervene in the world. They motivate ritual. And usually they're costly devotions, fasting, prayers, taboos. There are what are called credibility enhancing displays, monuments. Think about Westminster Cathedral. All right. So let's turn to rituals. These are the Concise. And religions, I know you all are reading John Haidt. This is one of my favorite quotes of his. Religions work to suppress our inner chimp, our selfishness, and bring out our inner bee, our cooperativeness. All right. Now, some of you may remember the now retired correspondent for the New York Times, Nicholas Wade. He wrote I think, an excellent book, The Faith Instinct, and he makes a powerful argument that we have a window into the original religions of our Homo sapiens ancestors. If you look at the Concise in Africa, the Andaman Islanders, which are the Andaman Islands are in the Bay of Bengal off of, I think, Bangladesh or India, but the Andaman Islanders, who were basically untouched until the 18th century, and the Aborigines, who came to Australia about 70,000 years ago. He makes the argument that if you look at them, they have almost identical religions, and they are the closest to our original ancestors in Africa. They seem to share the same religion. He makes, I think, an excellent argument that this is a window into deep time and a window into the original religion. And as you will see, elements of that persist in all religions right up to the modern world. And that first religion, song and dance, physical movement. There was less hierarchy. There were no priests or ecclesiastical hierarchy. That seems to have come about with the melding with politics. It was the whole community, no distinctions of rank, and the religion centered on rhythmic physical activity. And why? Because what we now know is that the rhythmic physical activity and music boosted our crucial neurotransmitters. Serotonin. Prozac boosts serotonin. Serotonin is crucial for your self-esteem, for a lot of other things. Norepinephrine and dopamine, they're crucial for focus, concentration, attention, motivation. Everybody thinks of dopamine as the pleasure chemical. It's much, much more. It's motivational, attention, and norepinephrine and dopamine mark things as salient. So the things that you remember are helped by dopamine and norepinephrine. Everybody's heard of oxytocin, the trust hormone. Everybody's heard of endorphins. Everybody thinks of endorphins as the runner's high. I want to shift your mind here a bit. Endorphins are one of the most crucial bonding hormones we have. As we'll talk at the end, alcohol boosts your endorphins, intensifies bonding with other people. This is a quote of Darwin's, that he understood that music and rhythm were, as he said, first acquired by male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. The musical tones became firmly associated with some of the strongest passions an animal is capable of feeling. Darwin was correct. We now know the neurochemistry and the function of a lot of that these are, again, crucial adaptations designed by evolution in our ancestors. Now, there's a brilliant piece of research that was done by Cohen and some others. And here's the summary. If we take Fred and we put him on an ergometer, a rowing machine, and Fred rows that ergometer, and we measure his work output. And then we take Fred and sit him down, put a blood pressure cuff on, and measure how much pressure it takes to induce pain in Fred. And we've got that data. And then we take Don and we put him on an ergometer right next to Fred. So Fred and Don are rowing in sync next to each other on ergometers. And then we take Fred again, measure the same work output. We take Fred, put a blood pressure cuff on him, and it takes a lot more pressure to have him feel pain. We have raised his pain threshold. Same work output. The only difference is that he has been moving rhythmically and symmetrically with Don. That's the only difference. What do we do with soldiers? They march in sync, right? Rhythmic, synchronized activity impacts endorphins. So that synchronous activity that Don helped Fred do boosted his endorphins, reduced his experience of pain, raised his pain threshold. But those endorphins also, he would bond a little bit more with Don. Right? Touch is incredibly powerful. That's wanted touch. So let's assume my wife is sitting at a table working. If I come over and I just put my hand on her shoulder and pat, her shoulder, she gets a hit of oxytocin and endorphins, the bonding trust hormones. Touch is incredibly powerful. Now, I don't know how many of you remember the 2012 Democratic National Convention, but at that point in time, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama hated each other. It was practically the Mideast negotiations to bring them together. And if you remember that convention, Bill Clinton gave a phenomenal speech nominating Barack Obama. At the end of the speech, Barack Obama walks out. Clinton sort of makes a bow of submission to him, and then they embrace, and Obama is just rubbing Clinton's back like there's no tomorrow, and the tear forms on Clinton's face. And this was powerful. There's touch, endorphins, oxytocin, bonding, and it's a political ritual in a sense, the nominating speech, but there was an incredible connection between these two men, where just a few months before they were enemies. I'm watching this, and I don't know if you all were watching it too. I'm watching it. I start to feel tearful. I mean, it was so powerful. We all have mirror neurons. So if I raise my right hand, the neurons in your brain for your right hand are firing right now. Your frontal lobe is suppressing it. But we have mirror neurons, and when we see something like that, our similar neurons go off. We can sometimes suppress it, but not always. And so when we see these powerful rituals, even though we may not be believers, we're still affected by it because of our mirror neurons, and you can see where religions hijack that. And rituals go back a long ways. These are this is a cave painting, and you don't see cave paintings with individuals sitting drinking a cup of coffee. They're always in groups and probably in doing some ritual. I don't know how many of you happened to watch any of the coronation yesterday. It was an intensely religious service, and the rituals involved music involved a lot of touching, a lot of synchronous movement, a lot of pageantry, a lot of what are called hard to fake, costly, honest signaling of commitment. And what do rituals do? They resolve a lot of social issues, particularly freeloading. So all the people that show up at that ritual are clearly, they are potential cooperators with the royals, right? Those are hard to fake, costly, honest signals of commitment to cooperate. And it helps distinguish cooperators from freeloaders. Punishment. Rituals often are used for non-lethal, obviously sometimes lethal, but oftentimes mitigate punishment. They're for commitment, they're signals of commitment, signals of courtship. They ease communal conflict. They're useful for territorial defense, and they are useful for groups to signal the quality and identity of the group. Think of all, if you watched any of the coronation, think of all that was being signaled yesterday about the royals, the monarchy, and all that goes with it. But the other thing is that rituals for our ancestors were crucial to prepare men for warfare, because as Fiery Cushman and some others have shown, we actually have strong inhibitions about harming human bodies. We have to be pushed to harm human bodies. And so there has to be preparation of men for war. I don't know if you can see the captions here. If you believe in me, divide into sects and kill and hurt as many of the others as possible. If you looked at the regalia for the coronation, take a close look. These are the primary instruments of yesterday's coronation. And what do you see? Okay, I see 5 swords. And one of the most prominent people was the head of parliament, Penny Morphant, and she's carrying a sword. So basically, part of yesterday's ritual, a deeply religious ritual, was a symbolic arming of Charles. Let's finish up with something that is, I think, worth everybody's knowing for multiple reasons. And this is, I don't know how many of you have heard about Göbekli Tepe. This is an archaeologic site found in southeast Turkey. And up until 20 years ago, the thinking was that we lived as hunter-gatherers and we didn't have these big communal rituals and sites for rituals until we settled down and started agricultural communities. And it looks like Göbekli Tepe has turned that on its head. It's over 10,000 years old. And it looks like it was a site where people came together for religious ceremonies while we were still hunter-gatherers. Right? And what's, I think, interesting is they found evidence of brewing beer. And these were some of the vats used to brew beer. Well, why would beer be brewed here? And it turns out that alcohol stimulates those endorphins. We have mu opioid receptors in our brain. Alcohol stimulates them. We bond when we have alcohol. And so our ancestors would get together, our hunter-gatherer ancestors would get together in Göbekli Tepe, and there are a couple other places in southeast Turkey, while we were still hunter-gatherers. And there's an argument that we settled in agricultural communities, not to grow food, but to make better barley for beer. There's a serious argument that we may owe civilization to beer. This is a stone from Göbekli Tepe. You can see, I hope, the dancing figures here touching. So in conclusion here, when you see these kind of things, I want you to think of them a little bit differently. Okay, this is a dance. This is symmetrical movement. It's touching. There's music. In this case, the music, I don't know if you've ever heard an imam's chants, but it's very musical. It's very powerful. And so you are supercharging the neurochemistry that bonds us to other people, that creates cooperative groups. And obviously that's Islamic. These are the Buddhists. Everybody thinks of Buddhists as just the robed priests. These are Buddhist ceremonies which have the same thing: color, music, symmetrical movement. Again, generating those bonding hormones. Think of the Wailing Wall. And if you look at any religion, you will see echoes of that ancient religion in our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the Concise, the Andaman Islanders, and the Aborigines. Evidence of that, evidence of those religions still has carried forward into all modern day religions, and they utilize these evolved cognitive mechanisms that were originally designed for other purposes. Think of yesterday's coronation. Again, hard to fake, costly, honest signaling about the group, military, 4,000 soldiers in lockstep, music, all of it. And it was, as I think all of you know, an intensely Christian religious ritual. This is a Pentecostal service. And again, what are the worshipers doing? They're reaching up for a parental attachment figure. So, in conclusion, this is, I hope you can read it here. I wish you would make up your mind, Mr. Dickens, was it the best of times or the worst of times? And what I would like to conclude with is the following, that it is the best of times, in that we are the first generations that have at our grasp a cognitive neuroscience of religious belief. We know why and how human minds generate supernatural beliefs, why they generate these religious beliefs, why we're all vulnerable to them, why they get spread, why we hold on to them, why and how they are utilized. Think about it. We're the first generation in the history of the world that has this knowledge. It's before us, right? And I would argue that makes it the best of times. But I think it's also the worst of times, in that all you have to do is open a newspaper or turn on the television news, and you see the way that religion still, I would argue, like Christopher Hitchens, poisons everything. All you had to do was to turn on the television yesterday, and you saw a medieval religious ceremony, conducted by a species that has sent men to the moon and has developed the ability to transplant hearts. So we are still burdened by these ancient medieval beliefs, which I would argue still cripple us. And I think that leads us to three crucial questions. Okay, what am I going to do with this knowledge? What am I going to do with it? The second question is, what are you, who now start to have, I hope, this knowledge? What are you going to do with this knowledge? But most crucially, what are we as scientifically literate, democratic societies in the 21st century? What are we going to do with this knowledge for future generations? Thank you very much.
Andy, that's very interesting. Thank you much. I think we owe a special thanks to the British monarchy for scheduling their coronation yesterday. So you have great thought, great material to work with. Timely visual aids is always a great thing.
Thank you.
Remind
thank
everyone
you
if you have. Oh, glad to. Remind you all, if you have questions, please use the chat function to ask your questions or raise your virtual hand. Andy, you want to stop your share?
Absolutely.
So, speaking of questions, Andy had one here. How can some people be immune to religiousness, the attachments aspect you spoke about, and the idea of an afterlife?
I think it's a very interesting and important question, because there are people who I've interviewed who say, from childhood on, they couldn't buy it. It just, they were never religious. They were never vulnerable. They thought it was nonsense since they were children. And I think studying those individuals and understanding, I think, helps. But again, I think it's important to realize that even if you were born not religious, or even if you were born and you never were religious, as a child, you are still vulnerable to a lot of these things. All of us have what's called promiscuous teleology. There's a great video of Randy Nesse and Richard Dawkins talking about natural selection, and both of them catch themselves constantly talking about natural selection as if it has intentional design, as if there's an intentional agent, and they catch themselves. So we're all vulnerable. We're born with a lot of vulnerability. Why some people end up never having believed, I think, is important to research.
Okay. I have a question for you. A lot of what you talked about today was how religion has, I will use the word hijacked some of our human tendencies. Do you think that was intentional or serendipitous?
I like Paul Bloom's view of it. It's an accident of evolution. It's an unfortunate, unhappy accident of evolution.
So religions evolved.
Yes, and there's religions. Okay. We were vulnerable to them. I mean, our Concise ancestors in Africa, it looks like, had a religion, and to have, it's very hard not to, in some sense, if you have cognitive decoupling, and you can think about that. It's very easy for you to think that your ancestors are still alive. When people die, their spirit lives on. It's very easy for all of us to do that. So that just sets us up. I would argue it's very hard for religion not to evolve.
So Carol said, thank you for this wonderful presentation. Sue had a question for you. I have thought for a while that the development of religion depended upon the development of our cognitive ability to imagine things that aren't there, leading just not to religion, but to other creative endeavors like music and art.
Could you repeat the question? I'm not.
Okay, so Sue, she had thought that development of religion depended upon the development of our cognitive ability to imagine things that aren't there, leading us to imagine things that all at the same time, those same imagination, and gave us allowed us to engage in other creative endeavors like music or art. Okay.
I'm not familiar with the theories about the evolution of art. The theories about music, the reigning theory is that it's an adaptation. There are people who think it's a byproduct of language, Steve Pinker for one, but I think the thrust of the argument, I side with the people like Darwin that say that music, we're born musical. We're born with creating notes is something that's an adaptation. The ability to imagine things that aren't there, that's that cognitive decoupling. I can imagine a group at work that I would like to see form. I would like to see a bunch of different people get together. I think they would make an effective team. How can I convince leadership to put those people into that team? I can have complex creation of things that aren't currently there, and that I can imagine those. And that's crucial for social life. But you can see that it can tip into other things. So that the idea is imagining things that aren't there was a useful adaptation for our hunter-gatherer ancestors living in small groups, but it can spill over in ways that we didn't anticipate.
And being on those endless camping trips with your close relatives.
Yes.
Fred had a question. Fred, could you go ahead?
Yes, I had a comment and a question. regarding the origin of religion, I guess it was always explained to me by different sources that ancient people on these camping trips didn't understand lightning, volcanoes, thunder, and they ascribe it to a power higher than themselves. And from there, it takes off one way
Yes.
or another. My question is, I understand everything you said, and it makes perfect sense to me how religion is as a construct, an artificial construct. Do you have any suggestion relative to your suggestion that what are we going to do about religion? Do you have any suggestion in talking to people who are religious without alienating them?
Certainly. Well, let me, you said a lot of wonderful things. Let me see if I can go back.
Okay.
Yes. Our ancestors, when they had volcanoes or lightning, we're all vulnerable to ascribe intentionality. It's just instant. And you see it in children. What are stones for? They're for animals to scratch themselves. All of us overread intention. So if there's something we don't understand, we ascribe human agency to it, and that was crucial because a false positive, is an inconvenience. A false negative, if the bush is rustling and I don't think about a lion, I could be dead. So we overread intentionality, all of us, instantly. It's called promiscuous teleology. And so our ancestors, they didn't have the explanations that we do. And so they're vulnerable to ascribe it to spirits and gods and God knows what else, right? So again, that's one of the things that set us up, is something that helped keep us alive. Hyperactive agency detection mechanisms sets us up for these spirit and religious beliefs. Now, as to what to do when you talk to somebody, you're not going to argue anybody out of their religious beliefs. And the evidence is pretty clear that the more you argue with people with religious beliefs, they just dig in their heels. I just suggest to people, look, you're smart, you're intelligent, you're an engineer. I mean, you clearly are smart. You have the capacity to learn things. Just, read some of this stuff. See what you think, right? You don't take it from me. Go look at the evidence yourself. And one of the things I did today is I showed you these mechanisms. I didn't show you all the evidence that supports them. And you just tell people, go read it. I mean, just see what you think, because you can't be, to me, if you read this stuff, it's hard not to feel kind of foolish going along with the coronation nonsense. I mean, that was, if anything was expensive buffoonery, that was yesterday. I mean, and it's tragic. I mean, it's truly tragic. I mean, Charles is personally worth $1.8 billion, and the British taxpayer put up minimally $100 million for one parade for one man. And they're in a cost of living crisis. So, and it's full of that whole ritual was full of religious nonsense, right? And probably billions of people in the world watched it. I mean, it's right. So I think education. Here's my other part of your answer. I think our educational system has an obligation, right? What I'm giving you is empirically supported, right? And this material should be in every Psychology 101 textbook. Anybody who goes to college and has to have psychology as one of their basic courses, a psychology textbook should not be utilized in educational systems in universities without this knowledge. It's there. It should be, in the basic psychology textbooks. That's my bias.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sherry, you had a question?
Yes, a couple of questions. Am I muted? Am I not muted?
We
We can hear you.
Wonderful. I had a couple of questions and comments. One is the burial site. You had somebody in a Jewish cemetery that was buried with antelope ear,
Yes.
antelope
Yes.
I'm losing the word. What was the connection? Why did you feel that that indicated an afterlife belief?
There are things in these burial sites that indicate that they wanted the individual to have these things with them for the afterlife. It's not
Oh.
just that burial site, but they're burial sites that go back to early Homo sapiens that certainly indicate that the people that were burying them thought the individual would have an afterlife.
Okay, the reason I ask is, my background is Jewish, and that's one of the things that I kind of like about it is that there is no preset doctrine that endorses an afterlife. I would like to say that I kind of wish that there was a heaven because I think that I would get in, and there's no judgment there. But I had also heard that if there wasn't already a God, man would need to create one.
Yes.
Which is kind of one of my favorite little giggles. I would like a seed for that tree that can fix everything, but I did not see the leap from having the tree fix everything to wishing having it grant wishes. I wasn't clear on, that step that you took.
Okay.
To me, they're both equally as absurd and fantasy.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Yes, if I think we would invent gods. I think that statement is true. And if you're interested in this, there's simply the best article on the evolution of pro-social religions is in Science magazine in 2008. The lead author is a man named Noren Zayin. But I think if you just put in Science magazine, evolution of pro-social religions, you will, it's a dense but rich article. And the argument is that by inventing gods and pro-social religions, it allowed for the expansion of groups beyond genetic kin. That it helped the free rider problem, and big gods and big moralizing gods is what allowed for large groups that were not kin genetic relatedness based. So that's one point. Yeah, I was unfortunately I was not clear. The tree business, what it's meant to indicate is that minimally counterintuitive worlds, when we create them, they stick. And the fundamental structure of it is that you take something and they're not a lot of violations of whatever it is. So a stone, let's just say, let me do it this way. Okay, I'll take this apple. If I say that this apple could fix your computer, do your taxes, wash your car, you're just not going to buy it, right? But you're more vulnerable if I say this apple on the night of a full moon can hear your wish. You're going to be a little bit vulnerable because they're minimal violations of appleness. And the one violation has a human twist to it, okay? An agent that can hear your wish, that you can appeal to. It taps into your attachment system. There's only one slight twist, right? And that, the evidence is that is attention grabbing and it sticks. And you'll say, I'm not sure I believe it, but I heard this thing last week about, sometimes apples on the night of a full moon can hear our wishes. We're vulnerable to remember that. And then if some people, start to create rituals around it, we're off to the races. Is that clearer?
I'm not seeing the distinction, but I'm not going to, argue that that's a point that you feel is valid. I wouldn't subscribe to either of those. So
Well, I wouldn't have you subscribe, particularly the last one.
I like the first one better, though. I mean, if you could make magic, I mean, I really like the idea of a tree that could fix everything.
Yeah, no, I would love an Apple that was an excellent IT guy. But if you just if you look up, but the point here is the point here, if you look up minimally counterintuitive worlds and read about it, you will see again that there is a robust literature on it. There experiments with children. There's it's researched. There's good. It's a solid theory with good empirical support. And that's what's important here, is that we've got this knowledge. And if you happen to see it when I put up the slides, that stuff is 13 years old, right? Okay. And how many people here had heard about it, right? Even though some of the stuff has appeared in big time journals. And that's what the thrust of my argument here is, that we've got this knowledge. There's robust theories, good empirical evidence, a vibrant debate about it that really started in the 1990s, early 2000s, and just exploded. I mean, if you're interested, there's just tons of stuff out there. Yet, it's not permeated the educational system to the degree that I think would be useful.
Thank you. Marilyn had a comment, not really a question, amplifying what you said. So her comment is, so rhythm is a natural, powerful way of being, but has been used to manipulate for the use of religion. I think you explained that very clearly in your presentation.
Right. Well, and not just for religion, for courtship. I mean, think about your square dancing.
Oh, yeah.
Think about dancing. Think about, I mean, square dancing is a ritual. You can see how fit the person is. There's all sorts of things. But that square dancing and synchronous movement, you're just jacking your serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and endorphins up, and you're bonding with the people you're square dancing with. And there's touch, there's rhythmic, and it's symmetrical, rhythmic symmetrical movement. Fabulous.
Olga, you had a question?
I'd say, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, let me just finish with this one thing. So, I think this is in Nicholas Wade's book. So somewhere in the I think it was in the 1400s. I can't remember exactly. I think it's in Nicholas Wade's book. They put pews in churches. Okay. And the reason that pews went into churches is to stop people from dancing. And so what did people do? They moved the celebration outside, all right? Mardi Gras. The origin of pews, I don't know about you all. I went to Christian churches and sat on uncomfortable wooden pews for too much of my childhood. And I just love the fact that those pews originated to try to stop me from dancing. How many ever hundreds of years ago?
Well, I would just interject that some sects made that prohibition work. I was raised a Southern Baptist, and dancing was just forbidden.
Yeah.
So
well, the old joke about why you're not allowed to make love standing up.
Yeah. People might think you were dancing.
Yeah, God would think you were dancing.
I'm glad you told the joke. Thank you. Olga, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, and a little bit of a comment. First of all, thank you. Can you hear me, guys?
I can hear you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I really, really appreciate this presentation. It was fascinating. While you were talking, I looked up eusociality. It was a new concept for me. It's fascinating. Really, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Two points. First of all, there are some Christian churches that don't allow pews. For example, Russian Orthodox, you don't sit during service. And there's a lot of movement and a lot of rhythm. And the idea is that your standing is uncomfortable as opposed to sitting down. So you pay attention. So that's one idea. But I have a sort of tongue-in-cheek question. I was raised as an atheist, completely tool-in, but there have been several instances in my life when I wish I could have an element of faith. Because most people kind of agree that if you feel faith, I'm not talking about organized religion, but spirituality or faith, it's many crises in life can be handled slightly easier.
Mhm.
So people who believe that they will see their loved ones after death are less uncomfortable dealing with death, for example.
Mhm.
So I've had some crises where I wished I could find faith. And I tried several times in different ways, never worked. And it's not because I'm such a skeptic, but it just, I don't feel it ever. So I'm just wondering, are people like me, and you've mentioned some who just can't be religious, are we mutants? Do we have a mutation? Because it sounds like biologically, anthropologically, humans are predisposed to have faith. So how come some of us are weirdos, outliers who can't feel it?
There is research in that area, and there's some evidence. And again, I'm just not up to speed on it. Where there is some thought that there are, their genetic, their genetic differences, but it probably doesn't have to do with faith per se. It's probably genetic differences that affect other systems that might be used for faith.
Okay. That makes sense.
That the things that permit you not to believe, or the things that keep you from believing, may be stronger systems that help you in other ways.
Okay. That
Okay,
makes a
so
lot of sense.
that you've got an adaptation or adaptations that help you in other ways,
Mhm.
but it leaves you with a difficulty generating faith. Yeah,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
I appreciate it.
and people, I think it is harder at times to, but it also shows us, I mean, one of the powerful pieces of religion, I mean, the word religion comes from the Latin religare, which means to bond. And religions accentuate human cooperation and human bonding.
Mhm.
And that's what we're up against, and we have to be honest about that.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
You're
That
welcome.
makes a lot of
Thank
sense.
you. No, thank you for coming.
Okay, Ben had a quick comment or question. Ben, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this talk. Very interesting.
Thank you for coming.
So, thank you. So, I think it's let me see if I can articulate this well. So, I think you brought up a good point. You said a couple of comments back where I think humans would have invented God and religion anyway, right? I think we're maybe evolutionarily speaking, we're predisposed to have religion. I mean, you probably all already know of the study that like organized religion in the United States has dropped to its lowest percentage in decades, right? So something like 20% of people identify with an organized religion, the lowest in decades. But it doesn't mean that like science and rationality and the scientific method is increasing, right? People will just turn to other quote unquote faith ideas. So like, for example, in the Northeast, organized religion in the Northwest, because Northwest Pacific of the U.S., organized religion is probably at the lowest it's ever been in decades. But like the percentage of people who believe in healing crystals or other kind of non-scientific beliefs have increased inversely to that percentage. So I don't know. I guess belief in a religion is part of just human evolution, human nature. Do you know the author Noah Yuval Harari?
Yes.
He said he wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*.
Yes.
Right? And he basically said the reason why humans are able to spread so far and do so much is because we're able to work together collectively. And one of the reasons why we're able to work together collectively is because we're able to believe in things that are intangible, right? So
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
No, I think I like his work. I think he's right. And we are the last surviving hominid because we're ultra cooperative, ultra social. Um, and we have we have something called cooperative breeding. I mean, I'll let you hold my 9-month-old granddaughter in a heartbeat. I mean, even if you're not genetic kin. I mean, we're ultra social, ultra cooperative, and we have the capacity to think about the future and create goals and things and think about things that don't exist and work for them. I think Hari is correct. But obviously my view is like Christopher Hitchens, that now religion has long outlived its usefulness, and we need to try to find our way through it and create civil societies that are not poisoned by religion. Religion creates ultra social cooperativeness in the in-group, but it also creates ultra bonding and violence and aggression to the out-group. And, we pay the price. We pay a dear price for that.
Thank you. Had a comment here. Had a comment here from Brian that said religion is used / co-opted for social control. Fred, you wanted to ask had a question or comment?
It's a comment regarding the concept of the tree that can fix things, or the apple, I think it was, that can hear your prayers or wishes. I don't think that's incorrect. If you look at the origin of the Mormon religion, Joseph Smith claims that he was visited by, I think, a 900-year-old prophet who told him where there's gold plates with inscriptions buried, and he had to go at the right time and say the right prayers and have the right companion with him. And he kept going back and he couldn't find the box with the gold plates year after year after year. And he finally found it, and it told him how to start the religion, and people believed it. And and that's how, I mean, this is all in his mind. He imagined this crazy story, and look at the Mormon religion now. It all sprang from an hallucination.
Right. But if you notice, I think that's a great example. But if you notice, he's visited by a man. It's talk about gold plates. Right. People had gold plates and boxes, and they buried things, and they're very few twists on basic concepts. They're very and the guy was a spirit, but that's just one step from a dead ancestor. I mean, it's very near, and he's vulnerable to it because he's, other people are vulnerable to believe him because there's almost no violations of fundamental human concepts, material concepts, boxes, plates, buried somewhere in the forest. I mean, it's just it didn't take much.
And I think with a lot of I don't know what to call them, outlandish conspiracy theories or whatever, people will clutch at straws for relief from something that they feel has been done to them, or they deserve better. They'll clutch at straws. They'll believe things because it makes them feel good, and they go with it and swallow the whole thing. But
they're only going to believe in the things that have minimal violations. And I didn't do a very good job of it. Let me give one more whack at it here. Think about the Judeo-Christian God. I mean, he's basically just an angry old man, right? And we're around angry old men all the time. I mean, there's not much, and there are a couple of twists. Okay, physically he's sort of everywhere, but with our decoupled cognition, that's pretty easy. But think about it. We're told that he knows our thoughts. Yet if he knows our thoughts, why do we have to pray to him, right? And prayer is just talking to somebody. There's no violation of fundamental humanness, and like I'm talking to you, But and so the Judeo-Christian God is again one of these minimally counterintuitive agents, and he interacts with the world, and he communicates, and he can it's just and I probably should use the Judeo-Christian God instead of a tree.
Thank you. So Angie had a couple questions here for you. in terms of cognitive dissonance, such as religious scientists or religious biologists, what's the purpose of keeping religion, or where's the missing link? Why would why would a scientist be religious? I guess is the way I read the gist of that question.
Well, I think you have to be very careful about generalizations. My response would be that the reason is going to be buried in that individual's unique history. I'll give you one example. Carl Giberson, I think, is the physicist who is very religious, and he writes how if he gave up his religion, he would lose his family. His family's deeply religious, and if he gave up his religion, he would lose those near and dear to him. They wouldn't accept it. So I think you have to look at a particular individual as to why a particular biologist or scientist. There is research that shows that the higher you go up in terms of, if you look at the percentage of people in the National Academy of Sciences, the top scientists, the people who are still believe in a personal God, it's close to zero. The other thing to keep in mind is Darwin. I mean, Darwin had natural selection figured out when in 1837, right? He's 28 or 29 years old. He figured it out. And one of the reasons he did not make it known is because he told his wife, and his wife was incredibly distressed. We have letters of Emma's that survive saying, you can't believe this stuff. And I think they'd had a 10-year-old child already dead. And Darwin sat on his idea in part because of creating the distress in Emma.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused him great anguish. And he was forced to publish, when Alfred Wallace sent him his paper. But we don't know if Darwin would have ever published, in part because of not wanting to distress Emma. And he put aside money so that a scientist would take his notes, and he wanted to make sure it was going to be published. But the original question about why a scientist would believe, I think you have to look at them personally, their relationships, their families, where they come from.
If you got time, we got one more question for you here.
I can stay as long as people want.
I know you took off your coat, so it's, the gloves are off, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I just think this stuff is absolutely crucial, and is not permeated the education system to the degree that it should.
Well, I think Sue's question here is a couple questions actually are very, very insightful. Hopefully, I'm interested in what you think about them. Sue asked, isn't it kind of a leap from communal singing and dancing to what we know as religious? Also, she asked, how do we know that interpreting these early behaviors as religious isn't a projection of modern thinking? Questions.
Could you? I didn't catch the first one, please.
The first one is, isn't it kind of a leap from communal singing and dancing to what we know as religious? So why does communal singing and dancing, how does that, what's the connection between that and religions or religiousness?
Okay. I don't think communal singing and dancing is necessarily religious. I do communal singing and dancing, and I think probably people do. It's where communal singing and dancing gets utilized to augment supernatural beliefs. I think that's where it's, the idea here is that dancing and singing and those things are basic evolved human behaviors, adaptations, and they can get utilized by religious beliefs. That's why that solves what's called the Zeus problem. I doubt anybody in this room believes in Zeus, or I doubt any of our Baptist friends believe in Zeus. Why? Because there's no rituals currently. There's no, Zeus church, at least there's none in Charlottesville, that have services on Sunday.
Mhm.
So I think you have to think again that the singing and dancing communally is not religious. It's when religious belief and social forces co-opt it.
Mhm. So
Does
the
that
second-
answer the question? I mean, I think
I
there was a
think
second
so.
there was a second question too.
Yeah, and how do we know that interpreting those early behaviors as religious isn't a projection of modern thinking?
Well, because if you go to Nicholas Wade's book, he details it why that they had the dream world and there were beliefs in supernatural agents. I don't think if you read his description of it, I don't think there's any question but what those were ancient religions in our early hunter-gatherer ancestors. I mean, it's still, he's making an inference. We don't have as much evidence as we would like, but I think he makes a very good case that the Kungsan religion, which is east coast of Southern Africa, Kungsan, and you see it in Andaman Islanders and Aborigines, and they are the closest to that original Homo sapiens population in Africa. And they have identical religions and rituals, close to identical.
Okay, so a couple comments here. Comment as you like on them. Sherry commented, initially, I think God was used to explain nature and events that man could not explain in terms given the pre-scientific time.
Yeah, I agree.
Olga states,
I think I would just say it wasn't God. I think probably there's a great article by Robert Sapolsky on desert versus rainforest religions, and that I would think the earliest religions that taking his argument, there were multiple gods used to explain the various things in the natural world.
Olga made a comment about, I think I related back to whatever goes on with a lot of stuff, whatever gets you through the night.
Wasn't my
Roland.
quote. Much
I'm
like
sorry, what?
She
I didn't
said
hear
it
that.
wasn't her quote.
Whatever gets
Olga
you.
said it wasn't her quote, but she was the one that put it in the chat. So Roland has a
My
comment here.
answer was red wine, but
there you go.
That works.
Yeah.
Roland's comment about Darwin is that he had a lot of courage.
Yes.
I don't know, is because
Yeah, absolutely,
Ellen.
absolutely.
Well, he had conviction and facts.
I'm sorry.
He had conviction.
Yeah, yes, he did. Two suggestions. Look up Frank Sulloway's, go to his website and get his article on why Darwin gave up creationist beliefs. It is the best article that summarizes how Darwin figured it all out, right? And it's just a magnificent article. And then get it's Darwin's great-great-grandson, if you've not read it, Annie's Box. And it deals with Darwin and his wife Emma lost their 10-year-old child Annie to tuberculosis, and that was one of the things that profoundly affected Darwin, and I think gave him the courage to ultimately, it helped him publish. But yes, extraordinarily courageous man.
yes. Okay, Ellen has a question for you. Can't the human mind hold both the belief in a super being and non-belief in the same entity at the same time?
Yeah. No, we can. Yeah. I mean, I've got very smart friends who are still believers, and I've got one friend who questions everything. Is just an outstanding analytic mind. He's smart as hell, and he's a fundamentalist Christian, and it's like,
What's up with that?
yeah, what's going on? And he Oh, well, I mean, what's his name? Who was the head of NIH?
Right,
step
that
down-
was
Just
correct.
step down?
Watson. Was
No,
it Watson? No,
Collins, Collins.
that's right. That's in a unique situation. I'm amazed at
Collins, and it goes to the individual, it goes to the individual's life history. If you look at, what was Collins' first name? It's not, is it Frederick? No.
Francis.
Francis, thank you. If you look at Francis Collins' history, right, he was an atheist, and I think he got, this is my armchair psychiatry, and he got, I think, what was a very painful divorce, and he had this sort of Christian awakening at a waterfall, and he's a Christian believer, and this is a guy who's one of the top scientists in the world, and he became a believer late in life, and if you read his autobiography, you can sort of discern that there was a personal crisis in his life. And it also goes to the individual stuff. He was raised in the Bible Belt near me. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, and on the other side of the mountain is the Bible Belt, and that's where he was raised. And I know one of his brothers who's fundamentalist Christian to the nth degree. And so I think if you look at Francis Collins, who great scientist. If you remember, he stepped in and helped take care of Christopher Hitchens when Hitchens had his terrible cancer. And he's still a believer, has written books about it, and there are books critiquing it. But I think, again, his belief is probably buried in a personal crisis and also his personal history. And I appreciate that's cheap psychiatry for somebody who's I've not interviewed, but you can read the book, read the books yourself and make your own intuitions about it. But I think it's there.
Well, you're not a psychiatrist, so you can diagnose. Well, you can make an offer opinions.
I'm violating the Goldwater rule.
Well, but you're not a psychiatrist, right?
No, I am a psychiatrist. That's why.
Oh, then, okay. Excuse me. Shame on you.
No. Yes, right.
Okay,
exactly.
so we have another question here from Murray, a comment actually. Can the seemingly growing disbelief in religion be credited to the availability of truth and scientific facts that disprove religious writings and the disbelief in magic that is necessary to believe in religion?
I think research will tell us. I think you have to be, I think this is where the sociologists are going to have to help us. I think you have to be cautious about that, because the rise in disbelief in Europe after World War II is associated with the Marshall Plan and economic growth and the economic leveling of society and poverty largely being taken out. And you see disbelief falling as economic prosperity rises. And the other idea here is also that when you have in the modern world, you have you have courts, you have police, you have laws that help enforce contracts, and you have secular moral authorities. They take the place of moralizing gods, and that helps secularize a society. Economic prosperity and secular institutions taking over what had previously been religious institutions. So it may not, it may not require the education that I think to, help move towards a secular civil society.
Okay. Andy, I don't see any more questions. I want to thank you for a very interesting discussion. I look forward to a future presentation when you can give us your answers to the 3 questions you ended your presentation with.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. Sounds like it's a very sunny day up where you all are. It's kind of nice down here too. So I really appreciate people coming out on a Sunday afternoon, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.